Here we go again. Now in this case, it's for what many of you have asked for, a budget oil filter shootout. You can see we have a number of different filters here, ranging from $4.50 all the way up to $7. Now of course you could purchase an oil filter deal, in other words 5 quarts of such and such oil, and they'll include a Purolator filter or a Napa filter, whatever the case may be. So the way that this is organized is based completely on the price point. So $4.50 all the way up to $7 for the Fram and the Bosch. So let's just jump right into it. So on the bottom here we have the metal base plate, and this is the portion of the filter that makes contact with the engine block. Now of course you'll see some different engineering among all 5 filters regarding the diameter of the inlet holes, but generally they all have a 9 to 11 gallon flow rate per minute among all 5 filters. Where you start to see some differences is, for example, with the Bosch. And with the Bosch, this has an internal, or it's internally lubricated, this gasket. So what that means is that it won't dry out. So that's one reason among others why the Bosch costs $7. Now again, of course, whenever you change your motor oil, just put a clean dab of motor oil on the gasket. That prevents any leaks, but also makes the filter easier to remove the next time you do an oil change. This is the anti-drainback valve. Now let me see if I can just quickly construct one of these filters so you can see what this does. Now the whole point behind the anti-drainback valve is when you shut off the engine, instead of having all of the oil drain out of the oil filter, this little guy, this retains the oil in the filter. Now the whole point behind that is the next time you start your vehicle, there's oil readily available. You won't have a dry start. It also keeps the pressure retained in the filter. So in other words, there's oil readily available. That's the whole point behind this valve. Now where you start to see the difference is the type of material that they use in the filter. Now the black material is rubber, the red is silicone, and the difference is the temperature range. That's the bottom line. The silicone anti-drainback valve, or the silicone, can withstand temperatures down to minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit and up to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Rubber cannot withstand those temperatures nearly as well as silicone. You can even feel that it's not only thicker, but also weighs more than rubber. So it's a superior material, and you find that on your higher end oil filters all the time, and that's another reason why you're paying a little bit more. Now, this is sort of interesting with the Fram. Very recently, they've upgraded the Fram ExtraGuard. It used to have a rubber anti-drainback valve, and this filter sold for around $5. Now they've upgraded to silicone, and now it runs for $7. Now again, you can still purchase these oil filter deals that will include the Fram ExtraGuard, and that's your best bet really. To buy this on your own, it's the exact same price as the Bosch. It's only $1 less than the Purolator, the blue can, which I figured off the top of my head which one that's called, Purolator 1. It's only $1 difference from the Fram to Purolator 1, so you might as well go with Purolator 1 if you're buying it on its own. But in terms of a filter deal, the Fram I've had no issues, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So that's what you have here. So your base plate, anti-drainback valve. Now let's talk about this guy. Now this is sort of interesting with the Napa filter. This is a bypass valve. And Napa is the only one that I've come across that they have a separate component regarding the bypass valve. This is pretty cool. The whole point behind this is, let's say that you're way overdue for an oil change and the flow rate is starting to constrict inside the oil filter. What happens over time, if you don't change the oil filter, it will start to degrade and then it will crunch up. Imagine take a can and just start to squeeze in. That's what it will look like if you just don't change your oil filter. If that happens, this little valve opens up. Let me give you a different one. Here you go. So this little valve opens up, and then what happens is, then you can have clean oil, unfiltered oil get back in the engine. So it's not filtered oil, but it's a safety valve. So this little guy would open up, and now you have oil getting back into the engine, as opposed to this just completely constricting the flow of oil, and now it's starving your oil, the engine of motor oil. It's a safety feature, but it's pretty cool. It's very cool on how Napa constructs their bypass valve. That is really, really interesting. So again, on the STP, it's right on top. It's built into the end cap. On your Purolator, it's built on the end cap, and same with the Bosch. It's built on the end cap. They all have the exact same function. So constricted flow rate, and then this guy starts to open up. Now regarding this is a coil spring, and the rest of them use a steel piece of stamped steel that keeps everything nicely conformed inside the filter. In other words, these components make sure that everything is nice and tight and constructed correctly in terms of the pressure points inside the filter itself. And every manufacturer is different. Some use these coil springs, other ones use the stamped piece of steel. I would imagine these cost a little bit more to manufacture, so it's pretty nice that Napa gives you that option, but they all have the exact same purpose. They just keep everything nicely tight inside the filter itself. Now all of these filters are made in the USA, and one thing you can immediately see, look at the STP, which is $5, and the Purolator Classic, which is $6.50. But look at the surface area. Look how much more surface area you have with the Purolator versus the STP and the Napa Silver. So that is one nice plus, again, why you're starting to pay a little bit more money for these filters. If more surface area requires more material to make, and that's why you're paying a little bit more. But starting with this guy, we have metal end caps and a metal center tube, and very, very nicely made. This is a cellulose type of media, 5,000 miles. Efficiency is most likely in the 95%, 93, 95%. What that means is all of these oil filters, they have a general guideline that they're tested on. And they're tested on the efficiency regarding capturing particles 20 microns or larger. Now, to give you an idea on how small 20 microns is, the thickness of a dollar bill is 100 microns. So you're talking about very, very small particles. So the lower filters, typically 93, 95% efficiency ratings. In other words, it's capturing 93 to 95% of these small particles. And again, 5,000 miles worth of filtration. Again, use conventional motor oil. If you're using synthetic with any of these filters, you're really overpaying for oil, because these are not designed versus your, for example, AmSoil, Royal Purple, Wix XP. They'll use a synthetic media which is designed to last up to 15,000 miles depending on the filter. That's when you're going to use synthetic. These are perfectly fine with conventional. And going to the STP, again, a cellulose type of media, metal end caps, metal center tube. This is really designed for 3,000 miles, or you can follow what your vehicle manufacturer recommends. I personally would not go over 3,000 miles. I will say this, over 2 decades ago, I had a vehicle with well over 250,000 miles, and I always used STP or Fram. Whichever was on sale, that's the one I just used. I never ever once had an engine issue, but I changed the oil every 3 months. Never ever went over 3 months or 3,000 miles. So as long as you follow the guideline, you'll be perfectly fine. Okay, so metal end caps, metal center tube, a cellulose type of media. Now where you start to see the difference with the Purolator is that the Purolator uses a multi-fiber high density type of material. So what that essentially means is the filtration is a little bit better. Now you're reaching around 97% filtration rate, and you can go a little bit longer with these filters. In other words, you can run high mileage motor oil with this filter. So high mileage is typically for engines over 75,000 miles, and they last a little bit longer than your conventional motor oil. So that's one reason, again, or another reason why this is $1.50 more. Very nicely made, high quality. Purolator oil filters are really nice filters. We've done a number of their filters in the past. Really nicely constructed filters. And then of course you have your Fram and your Bosch. Now this is the difference with the Fram, is that they do run a metal center tube, but the end caps are, it's a paper derivative, cardboard, that sort of thing. And that that, you know, turns off a lot of people. Even with the spacing, look at the spacing difference. The Purolator is just constructed a lot neater than the Fram. But I will say this, probably about a year ago we opened a Fram after I think it was 6,000 or 7,000 miles, and these end caps were still in very, very good shape. So I have no complaints against the Fram. Again, I used them many years ago. I just run synthetic on my vehicles now, so I don't really use any of these. Once in a while I'll use the Bosch. But that being said, when I did use the Fram, I had no problems whatsoever. Just change the filter when you're supposed to change it. That's the key thing. The efficiency rating is 95%. And of course, lastly, this is the Bosch. Now Bosch, as you can see, again, very nicely constructed, metal end caps, metal center tube. Many of you are probably familiar with Bosch. They make a number of auto parts, all the way up to Ferrari, down to just your basic Chevrolet or Ford. They are very, very vastly, they make a vast number of different auto parts. Now, this has a 99% efficiency rating, and the thing that's cool with Bosch is they provide a number of grams that this can hold, and this can hold up to 14 grams of dirt. The other thing that's cool is with Purolator, it holds up to 13 grams of dirt. So for 50 cents more, you can get another gram in terms of dirt capacity, but also has a 99% efficiency rating. Again, you can run conventional or synthetic motor oil with Bosch. So that's essentially a quick rundown on what you have here. So just to quickly go over what we have here, you have your metal base plate on the bottom, all pretty much 9 to 11 gallons per minute in terms of the flow rate. Right here's your anti-drainback valve on your cheaper filters. They're rubber. On your more expensive filters, they run silicone. Again, because the temperature ranges with silicone is just better compared to rubber. In terms of the filter itself, 4 out of 5 have metal end caps and a metal center tube. The Fram happens to use a paper derivative, cardboard, that sort of thing, but it does have a metal center tube. Again, follow how often to change your filter with your vehicle. This should be perfectly fine. And then of course your caps, they're pretty much all the same. The one nice thing with the Fram is that you have this grip, makes it a little bit easier to remove your oil filter. In terms of the strength, I don't have a machine to test the burst pressure. In other words, there are some cans that are just so strong. But in terms of how tough it was to open each filter, the Purolator to me felt the toughest just to cut open. So I would guess that this has the highest burst pressure. In other words, if you're off-roading and you're worrying about puncturing the oil filter, the higher the burst pressure, the thicker the can, the better that you are. If you're really worried about that, Purolator Bosch is an incredibly strong filter in terms of the burst pressure. Really nice stuff. We have a video on that if you're interested. And that's about it. So hope this gives you a pretty decent idea if you're looking to purchase one of these filters in the future. Any questions, comments, please leave it below. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.